Welcome to the Pastor's Podcast, part of the Jesus Culture Podcast Network. Always sounds so impressive. You can just put names on things. Jesus Culture Podcast Network. There could be like 2 podcasts, and we're a podcast network. I always love branding things. Great to have you with us wherever you're watching or listening. This is a podcast for pastors by pastors. Really, it's just for anybody who's in a local church, in the trenches, building the local church, pastors, leaders. We're just so grateful that you're taking time to hang out with us today. I want to let you know that we have a pastors conference, very similar to our heart here for the Pastors Podcast. We want to come alongside you and your teams and really just see you encouraged, equipped, connected. That's my goal. My goal is that you would leave the time together today more encouraged, more equipped, and more connected, and ultimately challenged as well. So Pastors Conference happens every January here in Folsom in the Sacramento area at Jesus Culture Sacramento. We would love to have you be a part of that. JesusCulture.com/JC Podcast will give you more information. We've got a lot of firsts on season 4. Season 4 of the podcast. You can go back and listen to the other seasons if you'd like. But another first for us, another new co-host.
Let's go.
Which is just so exciting. I'm sure that there's some, we need to give a plaque or something. This is what I feel like. We need to present a plaque, or this is how much we think of ourselves for the 50 people that are listening to the podcast, where we think we're pretty amazing. But so great to have. I was thinking we've known each other for a while now. We'll have to get into this, but it's so great to have Jennifer Toledo with us all the way from Los Angeles.
Yep.
Her and her husband, lead pastors of E58. Do you call it Expression 58?
Both, Expression 58 or E58.
Is Expression 58 like what your mom calls you when she's angry, and then E58 is what your friends call you?
No, we really do interchange both a lot, yeah.
So Expression 58, you've been the lead pastor there for how long now?
7 years.
You took it over, which I was just talking about on another podcast. I think it's harder to take a church than plant a church.
Yeah, well, we unfortunately got to do both.
That's right.
We planted it 17 years ago, and then we were associate pastors, and then we took it over 7 years ago. So we had the joy of getting both of those experiences.
And how long have we known each other? You spoke, how, was it with your first kid?
Yes, she was 2 weeks old. That was the dumbest thing I ever did.
What are you talking about? That's the best thing ever. You came to preach at our conference when your child was 2 weeks old.
First baby, 2 weeks old. Got on a plane.
I'll never forget it. Come on, so radical. All I remember is Wesley Campbell talking to us about this young girl who's out in international world, rescuing girls from the sex slave trade. These are the stories. I remember Wesley coming and just talking to us about you and saying, you got to meet this girl. She's so radical. She's grabbing them and saving them. And I remember him talking about you, and I was just like, whatever she's carrying, we had a whole not a whole generation. We were beginning to gather a generation together of young people. And I just remember going, dude, whatever's on her life, I want to get on like teenagers' lives too. And we had you come, and so good.
That was great. That was 2005.
Isn't it amazing how much lots happened since 2005?
Lots happened. Just so weird because we're only 25. I don't know how that happened.
How did I get into my mid-40s? What happened? So, well, it's so great to have you with us. It's interesting today because we're talking about, you have so much. I actually, what I love about you as a leader is you're a multifaceted leader. You've got a lot of stuff, preacher, leader, social justice. There's so much stuff that you carry and you do so well. But I was thinking today we're going to have, in just a moment, we're going to invite on Darren Whitehead. Darren's a really great friend and somebody that I just have a ton of respect for and love for. But we were talking about, it's so interesting how the Lord kind of brings the podcast together, because Darren could not be in a more different city to navigate COVID and to navigate this past season than you. Can you just tell a little bit about where your church is, where your church is and kind of what you're doing down there?
Sure. We're based in Los Angeles.
Are you actually in the city of Los Angeles? I know that people would just know Los Angeles as...
Our building is currently in Glendale, which is right on the northeast corner of downtown. Sure. But we're LA County, and our church isn't from a particular, our community comes from all over LA County. And we've been all over LA. So we've been in Hollywood, been in City, we've been downtown. So because of that, we don't really feel like an affinity to Glendale where we are.
We call ourselves Jesus Culture Sacramento, and people are like, you're not Sacramento, you're Folsom. I'm like, we're in Sacramento County. Okay, so we can go. I literally did this one time. People were like, you're not even in Sacramento. And so somebody tweeted that. So I put a list together of every sports team that says they're in a city, but they're not really in that city. But that was my pettiness. Okay, so you're in Glendale, LA.
Yeah.
Been all over.
Yeah.
And
So yeah, navigating there. It's God's been moving, but yeah, we've definitely, it's been a hard season the last couple of years, and very transient community, very diverse community. I think we have like 60 different ethnicities in our church. So very diverse people coming together, walking through these last couple of years. It's been a beautiful and wild journey, for sure.
Do you think a book will come out of this, in all honesty, about when you're talking about 60, because where you're at is so unique. What everybody was walking through, whether it's the election, and again, I know there are people that are outside of America listening to this right now, but they would understand what we're talking about. When we're talking about some of the social unrest, some of the issues we're walking through in the church and in society, how we interact with that. You guys were right in the middle of a unique world, and then just the diversity of your church and things like that. Do you think coming out of it, do you look back now and go, I think there's some stuff that we learned that is going to be a help to the body of Christ?
I mean, absolutely. I feel like we're constantly learning, for sure. Yeah, but it was because we were that before the pandemic, but it really got tested.
Yeah, right? It got put through fire.
It got put through the fire. And I think that's and some people it became evident. Some people weren't really down for the journey.
Yes.
To link arms with people that are really different than them. But for those that stayed at the table, it's been powerful. So yeah, I mean, it's been a huge honor, honestly, to watch the body of Christ that didn't lose their minds. The ones that didn't lose their minds, like how beautiful that they. I feel incredibly honored to get to walk with this community. Truly,
it's incredible. Yeah. I've talked to a lot of pastors who. A lot. That's a preacher statement. I've talked to pastors, I don't know the number, that have actually said, my church isn't the same size it was, but there's a depth of spirituality in our environment that they said I wouldn't trade.
Yeah.
They said we definitely lost people, and we're grieving that.
Sure.
But we're believing, for all the things we're supposed to believe for. But it's really fascinating just saying, but there's a depth of hunger, there's a depth of spirituality, there's a depth of maturity that they just said is so beautiful.
Absolutely.
And so even in the midst of all of the hard things walking out, to be able to encounter that. So
I love that.
What do you love about being in LA? Because LA is just forget COVID and all the stuff that's going on. LA is just a different beast.
I love LA. I mean, LA is so different, right? So you can have quaint little neighborhoods. I live on an acre, which people don't even realize is there's parts of neighborhoods of LA that are like that. They're rare, but there's so many different facets to it. I love the diversity, that true diversity, cultural diversity, not just ethnic diversity. Like it's so culturally different everywhere you go. I love that. I love the access to everything. Incredible people. I mean, I feel like constantly I'm definitely biased, but I think some of the most amazing people in the world live in LA because they're dreamers. Listen, if you want to coast, you don't live in LA. So, the people that are there are believing for big things. They're going after it.
This is going to sound so harsh. How do you get through the shallowness? So I say this, maybe it's not there. Maybe it's Orange County. Maybe it's funny. Every time I fly into Orange County, I'm like, I was not aware of what I was wearing or what I was driving until I landed in Orange County.
Yeah, that's not the vibe in LA.
Okay, because you're coming from the front lines of missions work, the front lines of gritty, just radical kind of thing into what I would imagine. And to be fair, I'm not down there, so I wouldn't really know. But you are that. It's that Hollywood. It's that surface. It's that plastic. Is that not really? Is it not at the level that we would imagine? I live in California too, but Northern California is just so different.
I think there's definitely pockets of that. Like West LA, has a little bit more of that vibe. We're on the east side. It's very different.
Okay.
In fact, there's a real and Orange County is known. I feel like Orange County people would be really mad about that.
Well, we got good friends. Mark Francie's in Orange County. We got people there. Yeah, Darren.
But it's very culturally different than LA. We're in our church is full of immigrants. It's full of people from the underground church. It doesn't have that vibe at all. And that's very true to a lot of the community in LA. So,
would you agree that you'd probably hate pastoring a church in Orange County?
100%. I'm not the person for the job.
We love all you Orange County. We love all you Orange County. Okay, so that's helpful because it's interesting. I'm like, the Lord plucked you out of that like radical frontline kind of missions type world and then put you in at some level another frontline.
Yeah. Yeah. And I mean, our community is very involved in the entertainment world and all of that. And I've had to have a crash course in learning how to pastor creatives. But it's different. And yeah, I think there's 10 million people in LA County, totally, right? So it's so like, there's so many different populations and
it's like asking a high school, what's that like? And like, I don't know, there's so many different pockets of kids.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, it's amazing.
Yeah.
How has it worked? And we're going to jump in with Darren real quick, but you co-lead with your husband. Yeah. This is probably a whole nother podcast we should do real quick on this, but real quick in like 60 seconds. What would you say is the thing that you've learned about co-leading? I would say this is going to be, your husband's amazing. Are you the bigger personality though?
I'm definitely the bigger personality.
Yeah, so you're the bigger personality. You show up in the room more than he does. He's a strong individual, but just personality wise, you kind of show up in the room different. What have you learned in leading with your husband? Being the big personality.
Yeah, we've learned a lot. I think we've just learned to let go of stereotypes. Because I feel like there's always stereotypes of like, oh, if the woman's stronger personality, then it must be like this. Or we've just let all of that go and really gotten comfortable, especially with time and age has helped, but just to let each other really be in our strengths.
Yeah, totally.
And so for him, he's so prophetic. He's so pastoral. He is the person that's going to call on people and check in with them. And that's just not me. So letting him thrive, and he is. That's just the truth. Like if you're hurting, go to him, not me,
Is he looking for a job?
No, we need him.
Because
I am not pastoral.
I have an opening just opened up.
No, yeah. So, and I feel so grateful to be in a community that celebrates, lets me be who I am. I do the majority of the speaking, help, driving the team, that kind of thing. And I don't know, it just works. And we're really grateful. And it's not weird. And I'm thankful for that.
I love it.
Yeah.
Well, I'm excited today to talk to our guest, a real good friend, somebody that I just really adore and love what he's doing. Yeah, I'm excited to have Darren Whitehead with us joining today. We talked about this, Jennifer. Well, maybe went through a whole different experience in COVID than you did in LA. But Darren, sure appreciate you jumping on and kind of just being a part of the Pastor's Podcast. Honestly, I'm grateful for you to come on, but just grateful for our friendship and running together. I'm better because of it. So thanks for jumping on the podcast.
Me too, mate. Yeah, I really love and appreciate and respect you so much. And I've just learned so much from our friendship and been deeply encouraged. Every time we spend time together, I come away feeling deeply encouraged. So thank you.
Well, here's the deal. And I'm going to somewhat say that back, but not fully because, Jennifer, I don't know if you have anybody like this. There's certain friends in my life that I'm not around them all the time. But when I get around them and I hear what they're doing, I go, what am I doing with my life? Like, I don't even know what I've done with the last 47 years of my life, but obviously nothing. And I'm like, I don't know if I am inspired or depressed in this moment right now. I don't know if I'm leaving full of faith or just defeated. One of those things. So you're in that category, Darren. So I appreciate that. There's some mix of like, I am super inspired by what you're doing. And then I think I've wasted my entire life by accomplishing nothing. So that's how it works. Darren, can you really quickly give just a summary of kind of what you're doing, who you are, a quick snapshot of your history, how you got where you are and what you're currently doing?
Yes. So I was born at a young age. That's a preacher joke. I
love preacher jokes. I legitimately love preacher
dad jokes.
They are.
Yeah. There's a fine line between dad jokes and preacher jokes. So I was born and raised in Australia and near Adelaide in South Australia and moved to the United States 25 years ago. And 1998, I planned to work in radio. And when I was in Melbourne, I applied for a work visa. And the American working in the consulate office in Melbourne misread my file, made an administrative mistake, and gave me the wrong kind of visa. They gave me a pastor's visa. It's a religious visa. The only way I could stay in America is if I became a pastor. And some people ask me, how did the Lord call you into the ministry? I say the U.S. government called me into this.
Wow.
So out of fear of deportation, I just keep preaching, and that's what I do.
That's so
funny.
So that was 25 years ago. I knew an Aussie family who worked in the music industry in Nashville, and I went and lived with their family for the first couple of years. Then I married an American girl from Nashville. Her name's Brandy, and then moved away from Nashville. So I was working at a church as a youth pastor, moved away from Nashville to a church in Chicago called Willow Creek. And I worked there for the next 8 years, started out leading the college ministry, and then I was leading the college and the student ministry. Then I became a teaching pastor, teaching to the adults. I think we had 8 or 9 campuses at the time. Did that for 8 years. Thought that possibly I might end up growing old there and leading that church. And that didn't end up doing that. So we planted a church in 2013. And this coming Easter, a few weeks from now, we'll be 10 years old as a church.
That's amazing.
And we've had a bunch of remarkable things. We ended up inheriting a couple of buildings along the way. We kind of sensed that God was going to give us buildings, and He did. And so it's been quite a story. But now lead Church of the City, and we have 3 different locations. We used to have 5, but we collapsed a couple during COVID. We have 3 locations, one in Franklin, one south of Franklin called Spring Hill, and then we have one right in the center, right urban center in Nashville. So we have 3, yeah.
Wow.
They have my first initial encounter with Darren. I didn't know it was Darren because Michael W. Smith had a worship album, and it was "Let It Rain," right?
Yes.
It "Let It Rain," and I would I find songs that I take into my prayer time that just move my heart. I'll just put them on.
Classic right
I'll just put them on repeat, right? So I'm in there, and then there'd be this guy that would get up in the middle of it. And just it was this Australian accent guy. He'd get up and he read a psalm, and then he just prayed this prayer, and I'd just be like, "Oh God!" Like as you know, as fire consumes, melt the wax. You know, all this stuff, all that passage. And then years later, I'm hanging out with Darren. He's like, "I was on that album." I'm like, "You're the guy on the Michael W. Smith album? What?" So yeah. I was a little bit starstruck for a moment there. So. Darren, let me just jump in. You're working a lot with. Let me just ask this real quick. You've actually started something called Hold Fast.
Yes.
You're working a lot with pastors. One of the reasons why I have you on here is not just because you have a phenomenal church that's growing, that's reaching people, that's impacting the city, but you actually have a massive heart for pastors. Can you just talk a little bit about where that's coming out of and your passion for that, the why behind that? I mean, you're not an old man. We're in our middle-aged years, but you're beginning to point yourself towards pastors in a pretty unique way. Where's that coming from?
Yeah, I think that something happens when you turn about 40 years old. Up until 40, you're kind of like trying to work out what God has equipped you for, what skills He's given you, what your calling is, what is your destiny. For me, when I turned 40, I started asking myself a slightly different question, and it's this: am I going to finish well? And a lot of my friends, and frankly, a lot of my heroes in ministry, have fallen in these last few years. And I feel like when a Christian falls, it's devastating. When a Christian leader falls, it's disillusioning. Yeah. It's like the mushroom cloud of influence is so disillusioning for people. And I just thought to myself, first of all, I want to finish well.
Yeah. Right.
And I want to get upstream. Like when a pastor has a moral fall of sort, we tend to ask ourselves, what's the story of redemption? And that's a good question to ask. The question that we don't seem to ask is, what about prevention?
Yeah.
Like, how do we get upstream and stop this from happening? And what are some of the signs that are indicative of this kind of line of work? What are some of the temptations? What are some of the ways that we soothe the pain that we deal with in this job? And what is going to help us cope with the weight of it in healthy ways, because none of us want to blow up our lives. Even the guys that have had these moral falls, they didn't go, you know what, I want to burn my to the ground, or I want to burn my legacy, or I want to tarnish my family name so that my kids are embarrassed about wanted to do that. They all wanted to finish well.
Right.
So I want to spend a little bit more in and underneath doing to serve pastors, and I want this conversation to be top of mind continually for me as well.
Yes.
And it's really come out of, honestly, a source of pain, watching this happen and wanting to redeem that pain by helping others.
I have a thought, because I think what is the national statistic as of last year, like 40-something% of pastors are considering leaving the ministry. What do you think, as you've been thinking about this and wrestling through this, what are some of the key components for longevity? What are some of the key components to end well? Do you feel like you've kind of, in this wrestle, are discovering what some of those key things are? And how do you guys, what is this organization? How are you helping to serve pastors?
Yeah, well, what's interesting is that, in the Sermon on the Mount, Jesus talks about 14 transformational practices, and 11 of them center around money, sex, and power. So there was this core. Jesus understood the human spirit, right? And there's this core. The New Testament church was called to be countercultural in these three ways. When the culture was greedy, the church was called to be generous.
Right. Yep.
When the culture was grappling for power, the church was called to serve.
Correct. Yeah.
When the culture was sexually promiscuous, the church was pure.
Yep.
And it seems as though, as leaders, we've always got to have our guard up on money, sex, and power. And maybe we tend to have one more than maybe the other two. That tends to be more dominant in terms of something that is a temptation to us, or more of something we're susceptible to. But we have a lot of conversation around what it means to be coping with a ton of stress, and particularly around these kind of areas. And we talk about, obviously, what is real accountability, who are the kinds of people you need to have in your life. I think one of the most important things is cultivating a marriage that creates a sense of oneness with your spouse. We run events. We run free events for pastors called Hold Fast. And John Tyson and I do the teaching and host it with our wives. And it is for couples. We don't have people just coming on their own. We're targeting really having a couple together. It's not a marriage retreat so much, but no matter what the spouse's role is, they carry the calling together. They steward the calling together. And so cultivating and nurturing and protecting a sincere marriage is another really key component to this.
Yeah, I love that.
It's interesting, Jennifer, because I think with pastors, we're not always, how would I say this? It's hard because I don't want to act like our job is harder than other people's jobs. So you kind of have that thing where I'm like, we've got people in our church that work hard, but there's a component to what we do in ministry that I don't think we stop long enough to just stop and go, that is real. In what we do right here, when there are staff members that leave who are hurt and offended because we're not just a company, we're a family.
Right.
When somebody leaves our church, it's not like we're losing business. It's not like I own a business and you decide to go somewhere else. It's personal at some level, at many levels. And then you've got all that going on. Then you're getting the phone call about the baby that just died, and you're interacting with the marriage that's just about to end, and you're talking about the teenager that's in rebellion. Like, all of this stuff is coming, and it's like we don't want to. I don't know. What have you encountered that, or even you? How do you not camp out in the spot that, like, yeah, this is unique what we do in the weight that we carry that's different than any other profession. And yet not stay there to feel sorry for yourself or somehow think, but just recognize that. Like, this is different what we're doing. And I don't know if anybody would really fully be able to understand that. Where I've literally been in a hospital room with a family who just lost their baby, And then the next day you're having to deal with staff that's mad, and then you're like, that's just real.
Right.
That weight is much of this. People just don't know how, or are not equipped or prepared on how to navigate that stuff, let alone COVID, which is a whole nother ballgame. People that were very close are now, is this just that we're just not equipped for this or aware of it?
I don't think necessarily, I wouldn't say it's necessarily harder than other jobs. There are really hard jobs.
Yes, I agree. I agrray.
There are some very unique components to this. I when you just said that about the baby, 2.5 weeks ago, I was in a room and with a family in our church, and their baby was born without a heartbeat, and it just like the weight of being in that hospital room, feeling just devastation,
Yes.
And to your point, man, I still got to write a sermon for the weekend.
Yes.
And I still, like, there's a ton of stuff that you have to. We have proximity to a lot of trauma often, right? And I think about my kids. I have 3 daughters, 2 teenagers and a 12-year-old, and I think about their lives. Like, there is proximity to trauma every week in our family. We're always talking about so-and-so, their marriage is in trouble, or they lost someone, or there's been a car wreck, or that's just ongoing. So there's that uniqueness. But I would say one other thing that is a little bit more intangible, but I do think it is very, very unique to this job. I believe we also have spiritual opposition.
Yeah, warfare.
And there is a level of target that is upon those who are in key ministry positions, who are in leadership, who are shepherding and pastoring. Mm-hmm. And the enemy is trying to take you out.
Jeez.
Yeah. Now, we also have the access to the power of the Holy Spirit, which is great too. But I'm saying that there is a level of fatigue that can come spiritually because I feel like the enemy is always gunning for us.
Yes.
For sure. Yeah. And I think too, just even, what makes this role so unique too is just the level of projection that pastors receive, right? Like, we're in this role of like people's father wounds, people's past church wounds,
Yes.
And the expectations of, I thought you were going to do ABC for me. Like, that is uncommon in sense of most people wouldn't expect their boss to be their best friend or to be at everything for them, or, so there are those layers and dynamics that I think we are navigating. And then we come home and still have our own families and our own teenagers to raise, so I think there are those challenges.
When the expectation isn't met, it's hurt that comes out. So in the business world, you didn't meet my expectation. I'm going to take my business elsewhere.
Correct.
I'm not hurt by that.
Right.
I'm just going to, but in our world, if those expectations aren't met, there's like hurt and pain. Yeah. It's just real, trying to figure out how to navigate all that.
You accumulate these wounds to your soul over and over and over and over again, right? People leaving your church hurts. Yeah. People saying critical things hurt. Staff members, not getting what they had hoped for and they leave. It hurts. And as Jennifer just said, psychologists call this transference, right? Mm-hmm. They transfer to you, authority figure, some of the baggage and hurt and pain that they have experienced and the expectations, whether they are conscious or subconscious. They're moving that to you. And if you don't meet that, then you're disappointing them. What can happen is, particularly those of us who do this for a long time, I've been a pastor for 25 years, you accumulate these soul wounds over years. And if you aren't careful in inviting the Spirit to heal you and bring you peace and all of that, like, it can take you out. Like, there's just such a weight to it that it can just, this is what causes a breakdown or a burnout or someone blowing up their life, is the accumulation of pain that you experience over an extended period of time.
Right. Yeah. Which then makes you vulnerable, right? For the sex, money, and power, the things you're talking about. Like, I think when we're not dealing with that pain, grieving, those kinds of things, learning healthy tools for that, it is easy to lean into the readily available coping.
Yeah. Yeah, the unhealthy coping mechanisms that pop up. They have for me too, I'm like, God, I don't want to have a jaded heart. We were just in San Francisco. I have a great friend who's got a great church in San Francisco. I was down there. We were gathering with a bunch of intercessors at his building. It was right in San Francisco, in the Mission District. But we just walked to lunch, and you're just walking by people. LA is probably similar. You're just walking by people that are in pain, hurting, like, whatever, just laying on the side of the road, all this type of stuff. And there's a pastor I've known that worked 30 years in San Francisco. I'm like, how do you not just turn your heart off? Like, how do you live in that city and not just grow a cold heart? Because you just can't walk by everybody and care. Yeah. So that the concern for me too is those unhealthy coping mechanisms that pop up that really begin to take us out, and then just that jaded heart, that kind of cold heart that begins to just shut off to the very thing that we want to give our lives to, which is people. Yeah. How do you stay in that place of just tenderness?
Well, 1 Corinthians 13, the trilogy of faith, hope, and love. We talk about faith a lot. We talk about love a lot, but we don't often talk about hope. Yeah. Right. And I think one of the most important things that a leader must do is manage the level of hope or fend off the level of discouragement that is always coming for you, right? And when I'm discouraged, I can't be the father, the husband, the pastor that I want to be. So I have to take some level of responsibility for managing the degree of hope that is in my heart and fending off discouragement. One of the key components of that, of course, is being in the presence of God. Such an amazing story of Elijah. When Elijah was discouraged and he ran, this is after the whole mountain experience, fire falling, Jezebel threatens him, and he takes off, and he's deeply discouraged, and he's suicidal, and he wants to die. And it's so interesting. God does three things, right? The first thing he does is he cares for his physical needs. Helps him sleep, he feeds him, sends an angel, feeds him. So there's a physical component to being discouraged. The first thing God does is cares for his physical needs. Second thing he does is invites him into his presence. He says, come and stand in the presence of the Lord. So the presence of God is playing a role in helping you feel hope. Yeah. And then the third thing is he asks him a question, what are you doing here? And he talks to him about his purpose, talks to him about like, what have I called you to? Renewed a sense of calling. And little did Elijah know that after that experience, he met Elisha, which is arguably the most powerful and profound legacy of his entire life, pouring into someone else. But he was faced towards the future. He was faced towards vision, and fresh vision from God is so restorative to discouraged hearts. And I find as a leader myself, I've got to continually do those three things to ensure that the level of discouragement is fended off and the level of hope continues to be buoyant in my soul.
That's so good.
Let me ask this real quick. I'm gonna turn left just a little bit in our conversation because talking about hope, we know each other, so I know your personal story. We don't necessarily have to get into all the details of your personal story and share all of that. But you've really walked through a season of your life where what you thought was going to happen, that you had been pointing yourself towards, that you'd been preparing for, that you'd been giving yourself to and sacrificing for and investing time and energy into, it didn't happen. And so you had to leave that and go start over and do something new. I guess you can get into details if you want, but I guess what I was realizing in your story is, although not everybody may have the same story as you, I think a ton of people are like, wow, what I thought was going to happen didn't happen. There's a transition into something else that's different than I thought it was going to be. And all of the inner turmoil around that, all of the navigating of that. I don't know how much you want to get into or not, but what would you say to people right now, or as we're looking at people that are like, I kind of thought this was going to happen. That didn't happen. I've been kind of gearing up, pointed towards that for years. We've been doing that. And now I'm having to transition to something else. Even, I'm not talking about jobs necessarily, although yours, included some of that stuff that you've alluded to. What would your advice be to people, or what would the conversation be around that?
Well, I would say that it's more normal than people realize. Yeah. I preached the message once called This or That, because most of the time we think life's going to be this, but instead it's that.
Yeah.
And there's a ton of people who move to Nashville because they're musicians, and they grew up in Texas and they were the best guitar player at their church. And they moved to Nashville to make it big. And then
such a condescending Nashville statement.
They go to the local guitar center, and the intern who's playing there is like 10 times better than them.
Yes, totally. That's exactly right.
So you have all these people who move to Nashville to be in the music industry or be an artist, and now they work in real estate or they're a pastor or whatever it is. So they think it's going to be this, but instead it's that. And so my story, part of my story is, when I was at Willow Creek, I was in lots of discussions about taking over leadership eventually when Bill Hybels was leading it. And he was going to, the discussion he and I were having was like he was going to hand the leadership of the church on to me. And there came a point in our conversation where I was in my late 30s and I was feeling restless as a leader because I felt like in my life my most energetic and productive years were like the next run ahead of me, and I really felt cold in my heart that I was supposed to lead, and I wasn't able to do that in the same capacity that I really felt like it was in my heart. So I had discontentment, and it really came to it was a great conversation. It wasn't a bad conversation at all, but he wasn't ready to be done and I wasn't ready to wait. And I just felt like it was time for me to leave. So I said to him, and this is before a ton of drama that's gone down with Willow in the last handful of years. This is 10 years ago. Yeah. But
we're all filtering this story. We're all filtering this story now through a lens. Yeah, keep going.
I know it's so sad to me because it's a magazine article for some people, like everyone involved are my friends. Yeah. Everyone is mentioned in all of these articles. Like I know all of them. Yeah. We vacation together, and also it's the first church that my kids were ever, born into and all of that. Anyway, it came to a point where I felt released, and I said to him, I'll give you a year's notice. You tell me what it looks like to leave well, and I can commit the whole next year to working out what it means to leave well, and I'll work out what I'm going to do from there. I kind of thought that I'd end up maybe taking over an existing church and become the senior pastor. And just as that went on, that was just not something that we were feeling excited about, and felt like God placed on my heart a real clear vision. I was doing a 40-day fast, and on day 37, felt like God gave me a real clear picture of planting a church. And I was 38 or 39 years old. And I thought, gosh, what am I? Planting a church is a young man's game. Like, what, I'm not sure I really want to do that. Young man or woman's game. And I'm not sure I really wanted to do that, but it was just so the idea of it was so compelling in my heart and so clear in my mind. And so that's what we ended up doing in 2013. But what's interesting is, so my fear, when I left Willow, my fear was that the coolest thing I ever got to be a part of was all going to be behind me now.
Yep. Wow. Peaking.
When I'm an old man,
peaking's my fear.
When I'm an old man, all the stories that I want to tell are just about Willow, and nothing could have been further from the truth. I mean, the most exciting, most beautiful, redemptive kingdom things that I've been a part of have happened in the last 10 years.
Wow.
And so, I would say to people, if you're in transition, you thought it was going to be this, but instead it hasn't happened yet. You're sort of in between the this and the that. Like, just trust that God has got something for you. It is not you trying to create your calling. God has a calling for you. So in the middle of this and that, you got to trust and be a person that is trust that God has something for you that is his plan all along. And that was certainly our story. And I'm so thankful that I'm thankful that we left. I'm thankful what happened. I mean, it's been really beautiful.
Bill Johnson has been so good for me being underneath him for years, because he just thinks so differently in regards to, I was asking him one time, I'm like, how do you keep the tension of, wanting to do great things for God, but being faithful? And I was asking him this question of like, how do you and he goes, oh, I don't think like that at all. He said, I don't wake up every day. He goes, I legitimately don't wake up every day wondering, what great things can I do for God? What could God do with my life? Mm-hmm. He goes, I just wake up every day going, I just want to do my assignment. What's my assignment? And if my assignment is preaching to thousands, great. If it's taking care of a church of 100, great. But so as I get older, what I find is this: it is way more about obedience.
Yeah.
Yes.
So I thought it was this, it was going to be that, it's going to be that. At the end of the day, I'm like, I just want to be obedient. Even it's funny because I am a very vision-driven, goal-oriented, vision. Let's go after vision. And I just find myself, as I'm getting older, way less about vision, even though it's there. But it's way more about, Jesus, I just want to do what you're telling me to do.
Right.
Whatever that is. Yeah. Whatever that is, I just want to do that. And that may change and that may morph and whatever. I just want to do that. And it seems so much of the turmoil, I think, is a picture we have in our head about what we think should happen rather than just obedience. Go ahead, Darren.
Yeah.
So I had a friend who was a pastor in my city who had an affair with a woman in his church and ended up being a massive mess. And it was so deeply discouraging to me. And I went to see an older man who was a mentor to me. And I said to him, what is stopping me from collapsing under the weight of the thing that I have built? And how does this not happen to me? Mm-hmm. And he said, well, it's the difference between two words. It's the word with or for. You do not want to do ministry for God, but only with God.
Yes.
Yep.
You want to go through the doors that he opens and only those doors. Yep. You don't want to build a door yourself. This is not about performing for God. It is about living with God. Mm-hmm. And it was funny, he said that to me. And as pithy and as overly simple as that sounds, I took so much comfort in that.
No, absolutely.
Because I thought, that is who I want to be. I only want to live with God. I want to do ministry with God, not for God. It's not about doing great things. It's about doing what God leads you to do. Yeah. And it's become sort of like a mental exercise in my brain of just man, there's some cool things that we could do. What are the things that God is leading us to do versus, just doing a bunch of cool stuff?
Mm-hmm. I think, so this has been a common theme, not what Darren's saying, but there's been a common theme on some of the podcasts we've been doing around, if Jimmy Rollins said this, what would you do if you didn't know what anybody else was doing? Mm-hmm. This concept that we're so aware of what everybody else is doing.
Totally.
That we kind of are just being driven by that.
Yep.
This happens to me all the time. I write a book. Another guy that's kind of my age in my circles writes a book. And I kind of it took me a lot to write that book. I put the book out. There's the book. And then 2 years later, that guy just wrote another book.
Dang it.
And now I'm finding myself going
how?
Wait,
what?
should I?
Yep.
Do I need to write another book? I should probably write another book. I need to be writing another book. And if I stop long enough, it's not because the Lord's asked me to write another book, but because I'm well, I guess if you wrote a book, am I not as good of a leader if I didn't write another book? Do I not have as much of me? Am I not as disciplined? Am I not all that type of stuff? And I remember years ago, there's a verse in Nehemiah where they just. Talking about rebuilding the wall, and the instruction was just walk out your front door, the wall that's right in front of you, do that. Yeah. And just the principle that we're constantly looking at everybody else. So here's my point though, working with God gets difficult when I'm looking at everybody else going, well, my with God doesn't feel that significant.
Right.
My with God is pastoring this community in Northeast LA. Mm-hmm. And then I'm looking at somebody else over there going, and so how do you actually do that with God and not get caught up in what other people are called to as well.
Yeah. For me, God has really been checking me on this idea of make sure you have the right metrics. Like quit using the wrong metrics for health or the growth of the church, especially in American Christian.
Oh, our metrics are screwed up.
We've literally turned church leadership into formulas. Truly, you can join any seminar to learn if you go to do A, B, C, D, this will happen. Now there's some great wisdom and all of that. You can glean from that. But so often I think we're wired to look at those metrics and think about how well we're doing. And just this fear of God that keeps coming on me of the metrics are, am I truly following Jesus?
Yes.
And where he's leading? Because Jesus wasn't afraid to poke at idols, and Jesus wasn't afraid to call out hypocrisy and things we tend to not want to do, in American leadership, Christian leadership, if you will. And so really looking at, okay, am I truly in a place of peace? Am I connected to God? Am I connected to my spouse? Am I connected to my kids? Like looking at the right metrics. And it's challenging, but it really is.
Well, it's challenging too, because we're in a Christian world that's showing you a whole bunch of different metrics.
Yeah.
Like the thought of if I didn't know what anybody else was doing,
yep.
would I be looking going, come on, this is awesome. This is so fantastic. We're seeing such great stuff.
Yep.
Like this is so great. I'm doing what he's asked me to do. Yeah. We're seeing lives changed, but we're not in that context. We're taking what we're doing and it's just sitting in the context of knowing everybody else is doing.
Yeah. And then we're burnt out and exhausted and we want to quit because we're trying to do the things we're not actually graced to do and called to do.
Man.
That's right. I think it was Theodore Roosevelt who said, comparison is the thief of joy.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And we've all heard that before. But that you can really love something until you look over the fence and see something else.
Yes.
And so for me, several years ago, I ran the Chicago Marathon. I've done it twice, and it was really, really hard. And I was training for it. And as I was running one day, some lady who was a lot older than me came running up beside me. She recognized me from church, and she said, Pastor Darren,
why are you so slow?
So I felt like I needed to run at the same pace that she was running at. And I was like about to cough up a lung.
Brilliant.
She wasn't even getting,
Brilliant
she
analogy.
And she said, do you need to slow down? And I'm like, well, if you do. So we end up walking for a little bit. And she said, have you run a marathon before? I said, no. I said, have you? She said, yeah, I run lots. And I said, well, what's the key for this? Mm-hmm. And she said this phrase.
I love this.
You need to run your own race. Yeah. Run your own race. The key is finishing, right? I'm not looking at the Kenyans and going, Indugu, I'm coming for you. You know what I mean? I'm just trying to finish.
Yes.
And she was saying, you've got to run your own race.
Right.
And there are times, Banning, where I whisper that to myself.
Yeah.
When I see something that's super cool that's going on, or I hear someone preaching and they're better than me, or they're a better leader than me, or whatever it is, I will whisper, sometimes audibly, Whitehead, run your own.
Come on.
That's so
Come
good.
on. That's
so good.
That is a brilliant analogy.
Mm-hmm. And so needed,
Run your own race. Man, this is the problem with the podcast is we just need to stop and just come to the altar. Just come to the altar right now. Wherever you are, just come to the altar. Yes. Let's pray for you. I would say this. I think that I give myself permission to mute people on Instagram. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Not toxic people.
Yeah.
But I just have to recognize.
High achievers.
I love you, bye. If you're doing anything great for God, sorry. No, I think it's just recognizing that I can't allow this thing to get a foothold.
Totally.
But I just keep putting my mouth to a fire hose of stuff. And just be able to recognize, listen, I want to get where one day I can, and I celebrate everybody. There's nobody that I don't celebrate. Does that make sense? There's nobody that I wouldn't look at and go, I celebrate you. But man, I'm having to figure out, run your own race, run your own race. Such a brilliant analogy and phrase. Mm-hmm. And sometimes I think you honestly just need to give yourself permission. Like you can mute them. You don't have to unfollow them, but just mute them right now. You don't need to be looking at every single amazing event and preaching clip and everything else. Sometimes you just got to give your heart some time to like just really actually do what you're talking about, Darren. Like, no, I'm just going to run my own race.
Social media has some upside.
I'm more and more wondering what it is.
Colossal downside.
Yes.
I mean, it has an extraordinary downside.
Yeah.
And most of the time, what it produces in your heart is hurtful, not helpful.
Yeah.
And so, once again, if you're trying to manage the level of discouragement and hope in your own heart, in your own inner world, social media is largely unhelpful.
Yeah.
I would say if you're trying to manage that, it's not helpful at all. I mean, I don't. And I still to this day don't know a ton of people who are like deeply impacted by the minute clip. Right. Or by the one statement that they're like, it's all beautiful, but I'm saying like that's not super impact. People aren't going like, man, maybe every once in a while I guess, man, I was deeply moved and transformed by,
one thing I would add too about this idea of running your own race. I feel like I had a hard lesson in this when in the 90s, early 2000s, I felt like God was really calling me to this, like to understand kingdom social justice. And I had no grid for it. Churches weren't talking about it.
Nope.
At all. And it was so hard for me because I felt like everybody was going one direction and God was like, stay focused here. And I learned this lesson. If we don't run our race when he tells us to, we won't be ready or positioned for the season that's coming. Because I didn't know a decade later that
it would be all the churches talking about.
It would be what everybody's talking about, right? And so but I wouldn't have been in the position I was in to lead the community God was asking me to lead had I not been faithful in that season. And so I remind myself of that often when I'm tempted to just do what everybody else is doing and being like, okay, hold on, what's actually coming I'm not aware of, that if we're not faithful to run our race now, even if it's lonely, even if we're not understood, but it's actually, God wastes nothing, right? So he's positioning us for what's coming. And so
it's fascinating you're saying that. I felt like the Lord told me recently, he said, Bannon, I'm playing chess. He said, I'm 8 moves ahead and you just can't see those moves. Yeah. But I'm 8 moves ahead right now. And so sometimes there's a move in front of us that just doesn't make sense. Yeah. I know that I can feel the Lord in it. It either feels like, we just sacrificed something or it's a step back or whatever else. And the Lord just is consistently reminding me, he said, Ben, I'm playing chess. I'm 8 moves ahead right now. And you're just going to have to understand that the move that you just did, that's all you can see, is connected to 8 moves ahead and really trusting that thing.
The first time that providence, the theological concept of providence shows up in the scriptures in Genesis 20, you got Abraham and Isaac going up a mountain, and the story, God is calling Abraham to sacrifice his son. And as he is obedient and ready to do that, God then says, lift your eyes, and there is a ram that is caught in a thicket, right? Mm-hmm. So my question is, when did God dispatch the ram? While Abraham and Isaac were working up one side of the mountain, the ram was already on its way.
Yes.
Did the ram come a month ago, 2 months ago, 6 months ago? God had dispatched a ram long before Abraham knew that he would need a ram. And precisely at the right time, that ram was going to intersect at the very moment that he was going to need it. This is providence.
Yes.
The reason that God can be trusted is that he is dispatching rams for you right now. Rams that are already on their way, that you are going to meet tomorrow and next week and next month. But they're already on their way. They've already been dispatched. They're already climbing up the mountain. And precisely when you need them, and you don't even know you need some of these, but precisely when you need them, they will intersect, and that is God's providence on display.
There's 2 altar call moments happening right now. I can feel it in my spirit. I'm just like, you got to come to the altar. Darren, listen, we cannot let you go without having a quick conversation about finances. Here's the reality. People got hit, but not only that, faithful pastors who have vision, love God, obviously, finances is a big one, and it's one of the most stressful ones. People aren't quite sure what to do. I mean, I'm on a mission to get people to tithe. In regards to this, I just heard recently there was an article that the guy was saying, hey, the church needs to begin to adapt and maybe begin to think of other ways to do money. But my problem with the statement was it's just giving into the assumption that 5% of your church is going to tithe. Mm-hmm. Like the reality is if your church, if 40% of your church tithed, you'd pay your billion off, you'd support all the missions you wanted. So there's an assumption that in America, there's so many different stats you see, but 3 to 5%, 10 to 20% maybe at the most are tithers. So this issue of just really calling your people to faithfulness, really calling your people to generosity, you have an anointing, unlike maybe just a handful of people I would know, around finances. And you live in a pretty affluent area, but it's obviously not just the affluent area you live in. There is an anointing on your life for this. We just have a couple minutes. If you were to sit down in a room with a handful of pastors and you said, I got a couple minutes to talk to you about finances, what would you say?
Well, first of all, I believe to the core of my being that if you are a tither, if you are a giver to the work of God, you unleash kingdom economics in your life. And if you don't, you withhold kingdom economics in your life. And so I'm afraid not to give. And I just believe it deep in my heart that when it's trusting God with your finances, and that God calls us to do that, and talks all about, if you will not be faithful with worldly riches, who's going to trust you with true riches? So it seems as though that God is watching to see, and it turns out God does watch. Jesus was, when the widow gave the mite, Jesus was watching what people gave. And the only time he ever referenced a certain number of what someone gave was the widow. So Jesus is watching us give. And it seems as though it is a test, because he wants to give us far more beautiful riches. He wants to give us eternal blessings, and he wants to see if we're going to be faithful with earthly riches. So I believe that to the core of my being. And because I believe that, I speak like that. I talk like that. So when someone comes along and they say to me, hey, we feel led to give a certain amount of money, or I just learned that they gave a certain amount of money, a sacrificial gift of some sort. Do you know what I think? My primary perspective is not, oh, thank you, because the money's not going to me anyway. My primary thing is not gratitude. My primary thought is, watch out, bro. You're about to be blessed.
Yeah.
God's going to bless you, And so we've just done a campaign in the last just over a year. We're going to build something it's going to be serving our city, right? We basically met with the governor and the mayor and the chief of police, and we just said, we're a church. How can we be helpful? What are the biggest problems in our city? And how can we be helpful? What would you be glad that we did? And the outcome of that was 5 issues. It was a listening tour, and there's 5 issues. The first issue was mental health and suicide prevention. The second was reliable transportation for single moms. The third thing was they need more foster families, families who are in foster care, and helping them stay in it. The fourth thing is that kids were aging out of foster care, and most of them go to prison or they get pregnant, and so it's getting upstream. And the last thing was temporary housing for kids who are in state custody in the child welfare system before they get placed in a home. We said, all right, well, we're going to build something that addresses all 5 of those needs.
Wow.
And so for the last year, we've been developing that. And I originally thought it was going to cost about $15 million to do that. And I thought, all right, we'll challenge our church to do that. It turns out that, it was going to be more like 30 million. And then I just found out it was going to be 43 million. And we raised $44 million.
Wow.
And people
it's profound, the vision of it too.
Yeah.
we want to get behind this, like, James 1:27, pure religion in the sight of God the Father is caring for orphans and widows, right? So apparently God himself, the Father, is looking at the earth, and when he sees someone care for an orphan or a widow, he goes, now that is pure.
Yes.
Yeah.
There's a lot of things that are going on in the world that God would not call pure. They're called religion, but they're not pure. But caring for kids, caring for vulnerable children, and caring for vulnerable women, widows and orphans, God calls that pure. Well, we started like sharing this vision with our church, and I've never done anything like this before. I've never had a single person give $1 million check to our church, right? We had 12 families give us $1 million or more in our church. So we raised $15 million with just 12 families.
Wow.
And I mean, it was astonishing. So we did this one night where I had 40 families and we raised 17 million. Then we raised another 20 with the church at large, and then we raised another 7, and that's how we got to 44 million.
Wow.
But I will tell you this, particularly wealthy people, most of them were not wealthy at some point. And they're as amazed as anyone that they are in a place now where God has entrusted significant wealth to them. And they feel this sense of calling to do something with that.
Yeah.
So you got to begin with the assumption that people actually want to give to meaningful kingdom enterprises. They want to. It is not me trying to extract money out of them. Like, they want to be a part of kingdom things. And it turns out lots of people did. Lots of people wanted to be a part of this thing, and it's called The Village. And we break ground on it in about 2 months.
It's incredible.
That is exciting.
I know, it's pretty amazing. I've seen the layout of it. It's pretty incredible. Darren, I sure appreciate you jumping on. Thanks for being a part of it. We'll have to do it again.
So good.
Jennifer, right? I know I could just sit and have these conversations all day long. So
I'm inspired.
Listen, guys, check it out. Again, I want to tell you about Pastors Conference coming up in January you can be a part of. And I want to end with a quick word about the Jesus Culture School of Leadership. This is a chance for us just to come alongside. We've got people from all over the world that join online. And ultimately, our job is we want to do this. We want to raise up spiritually mature, relationally healthy, effective leaders to see the kingdom advanced. But we'd love to come alongside, serve you as a pastor, any of your team as well. So listen to this and we'll do it again.